Hello, and welcome to the Families Embracing Diversity Conference. You all are in for a treat because we are here with Miss Valarie, someone I deeply admire and learn a lot from daily. She is a nationally recognized diversity and cultural fluency thought leader with a background in education and a focus on improving outcomes for children of color. She founded Culturally Fluent Families in 2014, which has grown to a 20,000 member international group of parents representing various cultures and family structures. Hi, Miss Valarie. Thank you so much for being here. How are you today?
I'm good, Vanessa. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Good.
So tell us, why is it important for all kids to have a strong sense of belonging, and how can parents help nurture that in their children?
So let's take what do we even mean when we're talking about belonging, right? So all of us as humans we need connection. We want to feel like we're a part of things. We're connected to something and something's connected to us. And so having a sense of belonging for children means having a place where they feel free enough to be themselves. But it's not just about how they feel, but it's how people feel towards them. A place where they feel valued, a place where they feel seen, a place where they can be heard, and a place where their concerns actually are considered because we want them to have that sense that this is my place. This is my place. I fit in here. And so it's really important for our children to have that sense of belonging because belonging is how we develop ourselves in terms of personality and identity. So when I think about belonging, one of the ways of explaining it is because we all understand it, right, at the most general levels. It's part of identity, and so that's why it's really important for our children. So it's when we say we are American, we belong to something, right? If it's our family, it's the Johnsons, it's the Kavanaughs, it's the Chadwicks. We belong to something and we name it, we claim it, and it claims us in return. And so, it's the same thing. So what does that mean for little children outside of a family? They go to schools, and what do schools have? They have mascots and they have names. So we are lions and we're tigers and we're ravens. And so there's something prideful when we say that and we talk about being a collective part of something that's bigger than ourselves. But in the sense of what it means to children, they get to be fully human. They get to be fully themselves and express themselves in ways that people are not trying to restrict or deny or limit in certain ways. And so, like I said, that's tied to identity. And so it can be tied to cultural identity. It could be tied to states, right? Even states root for their states. And so it could be cultural, it could be racial, it could be ethnicity. But we all have and so when we're saying belonging, we really are talking about the places that feel parts of our identity that we think are important.
So just by being a part of those groups, that is how children begin to foster that sense of belonging because they're part
Right.
of groups, correct?
Absolutely. So it's being a part of things that feel like it embraces who they are. So for most of us as children, that starts with our family. Our family is our first place of belonging. It's our first place of identity. And so that's so we learn how to be connected to the people within our family. But then, by 3 years old, 4 years old, or at least 5, when kids go off to kindergarten, they go outside of their families. And so belonging takes on kind of a different connotation.
Right.
So when we have children that only feel like they belong to their family, what do they do when they go out into the wider world and they begin to interact with other people, right? And so, like I had a good friend who would say, the Johnsons don't do that. That's the way that he was teaching his child to interact with other people. well, why are you doing it that way? This is what the Johnsons do. Like, this is how we do it. And so it gave, it's almost like when you belong to something, right? there's something, there's such a bigger power and a bigger force. So when you come in and you say the Johnsons, the Johnsons don't do that, or this is how the Johnsons do it, it makes you have a greater sense of self-esteem, right? That you have. It helps you have a greater grounding as you go out into the world. So we start off with belonging within our families. And, of course, there's different family dynamics, of course, in terms of what that means. And so if we don't get that, because everyone doesn't, unfortunately, get that within their families, belonging is so important to who we are. It's so central to who we are and our identity that children will look for belonging somewhere. So if we don't create those spaces for them, if we don't create those opportunities for them to connect in positive ways and build bonds within schools and sports teams and those kind of things, that's when we see children create and start connecting to things that may or may not be as healthy and positive for them. Because as people, as human beings, we are meant to be connected to other things. And so all of us look for that in one way or another.
That makes a lot of sense. So what about in families when, let's say families grown by adoption, and that maybe there is a Black child in a white family who maybe they're looking for belonging with other Black people, but they don't find that represented in their family. How can they find that sense of belonging to a community that maybe they don't get to participate in regularly?
Now, I think that that's where, for parents, that parents have to take on such a responsibility. And so, but even knowing how to belong, even as a Black child in a white family, starts within a family. So imagine, I try to contrast things, right, with good examples and not so great examples. And so one of those examples could be just simply being adopted into a family for some is a disconnect. They don't know what the disconnect is. They don't know why they feel the disconnect. And that could be because other people in the family, even if the parents are incredibly loving and embracing of Black culture, they go to other family gatherings and they don't necessarily sense that or feel that. Or as kids grow older and they start demonstrating different kinds of personality traits or different likes and different things like that within a particular family, the family may feel uncomfortable with that, right? Some families, people talk to me, as you know, people talk to me all the time. And so there are families, where people say, well, that child is acting too Black, or you're doing too many Black things, or why is the emphasis on race? So that means that that child isn't getting to develop with full expression, because we're starting to label and limit and do all of those kind of things, even in the family unit, which should be where we learn what it feels like to feel safe and belong. And so then on the other side of that, how do families create that sense of belonging? Is that children see, we grow up in, we always talk about diversity. And so we live in a diverse world, but living in a diverse world also means that we live in a racialized world. We live in a racialized society. And so belonging becomes very important for those children, not because of the color of their skin. And that's something I really want to impress upon people, that we talk about it as though it's skin deep. And it isn't skin deep, it's historically deep, right? It's country deep, it's context deep. And children just are wearing that particular uniform that says which team I belong to. And so for families, they have to be open and embrace, not just connect their kids for a sense of belonging, but they actually have to embrace those cultures as well, where their children see them allowing people to be fully expressive, to be fully themselves, to be fully safe around their families. And that's what gives kids permission to do the same, right? So we all know that, having nothing to do with race, but if we take our kids somewhere, right, or we take them to a carnival or to some new place, before they run, most of them, they look back at us, right? Like, is this okay? Is this place okay? When somebody talks to them, they look at us first to know if they should talk to this person. And so kids are looking. So when you talk about Black children within white families, or even any mixed race families, where the dynamics are that the parent and the child are of different races or ethnicities or different countries of origin, how does the child know where they fit and where they belong? And so all kids will have those questions, but children within those circumstances that are being raised by parents of different races, those questions are much more palatable. Who are my people? Where do I fit? Where do I belong? And when they can't get those answers, this is why it's really important, parents. When they can't get those answers, they start picking apart themselves. Because if you don't give me a place where I can fit, if you don't find a huge playing ground for me to play in, and this is the only box that I'm allowed to play in, then I have to start deconstructing myself. I have to start picking myself apart. I have to start finding what it is about me that separates me. But what we really want children to do is go to a place and say, this is my place. I belong here. This is my school. And feel like it's my school, feel like this is my neighborhood. But how do you do that when other people are saying, get out of my neighborhood?
Right.
You don't belong to my school. And that's the thing that we have to understand where children are concerned, and make sure that we're giving them the right kind of tools to deal with those issues.
Irina brought up a good question. If a family travels a lot and speaks many different languages, is it okay for a child to feel like they belong to the whole world? How do you nurture a sense of belonging if they're constantly moving to new places and new circles?
Well, you know what? I think theoretically we do, right? Theoretically, we're human. So as a human, we have all these spaces, but we also have to understand that we enter into other people's spaces. It's almost like saying, are all the houses on the block ours? Well,
Right.
no, right? So we all may live in the same subdivision, but I don't have a right to everyone's house. I don't have a sense that I can walk into anyone's door and be fully me in everyone's space. So do we want children to feel like they're children of the world? I want children who have a strong sense of belonging, which means a strong sense of identity. And that strong sense of identity is what carries them around the world. So that when they go around the world and they can't just walk into anyone's door, their sense of belonging and their sense of self is residing within them. So I know who I am when I'm in France. I know who I am when I'm in Germany, but I don't become German because I go to Germany, right?
Yeah.
I don't become French because I go to France. But if I go to France and I have no sense of who I am, that's going to change the way that I interact with people and places because of my own lost or fractured or fragile identity, right? And so we see that, and we see people picking up different things. But I think that the way to look at it is just looking at a subdivision. It's all ours. We can all say, we live in London Bridges subdivision, but every house doesn't belong to us. And so we should not feel the same way anytime we enter spaces, just because, we're all human and share humanity.
That makes sense.
That's a great question.
This is another wonderful question. I know it's a big one, so I feel like you're probably not going to be able to dive into all of it, but the tween and teen stage in transracial adoption and struggling with finding that sense of belonging, if you have white parents and I'm assuming, transracial adoption. I know that's a big stage of life.
So she's saying she wants to know about how to navigate that. Here's the thing. Children are communicating with you. It's not you helping them navigate those spaces. They're communicating to you, and they may be communicating in ways that you don't know. They may have no energy when they come home from school. They don't feel connected to that community. They're not developing. They have friendships, but the friendships don't necessarily seem stable. Those friendships seem to move around, and they seem to be very situational. And that's when we should worry about our teens and our tweens, because remember what I said, when you get to be a teen or a tween and you don't start to really have a crafted, solid identity, self-identity, We look for belonging. We long for belonging. And we're going to start to seek it out in anybody that accepts us. And so this is something I want to say to parents of children who, non-white children, children who are adopted into families. What I want to say to you is that when they're in communities where they don't have that big playing field and that sense of belonging, they kind of maybe float into what, you know, some of the kids might call kind of the other group or the misfit group. That isn't necessarily a collection of kids that collect by race, but they collect because they feel rejected. So you get, you know, the kid who's too tall and lanky, who's not accepted, and you get this kid. And so you begin to get this group of kids together who, and I'm saying misfits, but not because of something they've done, but because of how they feel about the environment that they're in. And being in that environment, they start to connect, but they're not connecting over positive identity. They're connecting over feeling lost. They're connecting over feeling disconnected. They're connecting over feeling this isn't my place. I don't have a place. And so that's when we worry about our teens and our tweens, because they're not having a positive outlet for what those feelings are. So then what do parents do, right? What do parents do? You try different things. You try, now, hopefully before they become tweens, you've done some scouting. You know, I like to think that parents are talent scouts, right? So we watch our kids and we go, wow, they can kind of draw pictures. Wow. You know what I mean? We're looking, we hear them. Wow, they kind of have a voice. And so we pick up on these different things that they seem that they might be interested in. And then what the parents' job is, throw a smattering of those things. Try different things. Watch for the things that make your children light up. Watch for the things that your children pay a lot of attention to and don't move from. So you have to go to places. You have to experience things. If your kid is not on a team, go to another team's game and watch how your child interacts. Watch whether or not other kids approach your child and want to include them. So you should be doing so much of that before the teen years, so that your kids are carving out and crafting that for themselves. But at this point, as a teenager, they are really reporting back to you how they feel. And they're doing it by the activities that they're choosing. And when they don't feel a sense of belonging, remember I said it's not just who you feel connected to, but who feels connected to you. And when you don't have that, the kids just retreat into themselves. And so they start, like I said, they start picking apart themselves, doing whatever they can do to fit in. So we all know that those can be things that are not healthy, not wise, you know, making poor decisions and those kind of things. And so that's why it's very, very critical that your kids, that you have them in places that make them feel, where do they run? So that's the thing I would ask parents. If something were to happen, if something happened that really bothered your child, that really affected your child emotionally and deeply, where would your child go? Do they have a place? Do they have a person? Who would they pick up the phone and call? Who would they text? Who would they FaceTime? Would they go to the park? Would they go fishing? Where is the place that they feel whole and complete, where they can just let all of the things sort of wash over them? And Vanessa, you know, I tell stories. I will only tell one, and that is, and so he wasn't a teen, but this is the thing that I mean. We're a church family. We go to church, and one Sunday I was really sick. I don't think my son was more than 8, but I was sick that day. And my son starts praying over me. He's like fanning me. He's doing all these things. He's pressing on my chest like he's seen the doctors because he wants me to be well. And I'm thinking, what is this? And he said, we have to go to church. And I said, we have to go, a 7 or 8 year, we have to go to church. And he said, yes. He said, do you know what kind of week I've had? I've been around white people all week. I need to go to church. That's where my people are. And so I'm saying, even at very young ages, children need to have those places where they can decompress, where they get to just be joyous and they're not conscious of every move that they make and every thought that they think. And our children are giving us those messages. They're not waiting until they're teens and tweens to tell us that. And so we have to, as parents, we have to be tuned into that, and we have to be conscious of that as we watch our children. And we also have to be really honest with ourselves about whether or not we are crafting those spaces for our children.
I forgot I was on mute. That makes a lot of sense. Stephanie followed up with her. She said let me just put it up. Her question is when they are embarrassed or struggling with having white parents and how that impacts their sense of belonging.
It would be like anything else, right? So, are they embarrassed, or does it change how they interact with people? So, sure, if I report the emotion might be embarrassed, but what it does is it changes who I am with this group of people. It makes people start if I go to a place that's fully me, where I just am fully myself and I'm comfortable, I don't have to answer all those kinds of questions. So sometimes it's not about so much, I don't like my parents, I don't love my parents, but when my parents are in this space with me, it's no longer my space. When my parents are in this space with me, I now am seen as someone different. So it's the same way that as a family gets together, you might watch something on television and you may choose a movie that if it's you and your spouse, you might choose something different if your children are not with you. Because all of us, not just racially, all of us have different parts of our identities that we want to explore. And so Black children, any children want to be able to explore that identity. And when we show up as parents, it changes how they interact and how they flow with that group of people. So imagine that being a teacher. Imagine it being same race parents, but the parent is a teacher. And so the teacher shows up at the birthday party. It's the same thing. The children change how they act and they behave because of who that parent is. And so when what the child is trying to communicate to you is, I don't want this to be about you. Because when you show up in that space, it is no longer about me. It becomes about you, who you are to me, what our relationship is, all of these different questions. And there are times in my life, I don't want it to be about you. I just want it to be about me. And that's the difference. It would be the same for somebody who has, a pro ball player for a parent, or somebody who has, an entertainer for a parent. It changes the dynamics of who your child is with that group. And if it changes the dynamics, it changes their sense of belonging for those moments. And all of us need to be able to decompress. All of us need to be able to shed some layers. All of us need to just be able to be something in the moment. And the thing that I would say to parents is, how often, how much time is being spent that way? It's not like there's 24 hours where you're being shunned. It's you go to a basketball game and your child doesn't want to sit with you. You will live. You go home together, you have dinner, you ride in the car together. What you do to support your child is you say, I'll meet you at the front door. We'll pull the car around and we'll go to the front door. You can't take it personally. And so that's why I'm trying to say it differently as, like me, so I'm the Sunday school teacher. So it's the same thing. Oh, your mom's the Sunday school teacher. So it's like, Mom, go over there. We're talking about stuff. And so kids have to be able to have those spaces without you, because they can't figure out who they are when you're in that space with them as well.
That makes so very much sense. On the other side of that coin, they are family, they are connected. So it won't always be possible to give them that space to, especially with younger kids, to give them the space to just be without you present. So how do we prepare our kids to deal with the questions, the comments, the things that, the microaggressions, the little things of who is that? Why is she here? Having to explain.
You know what? Here's where I think that we make a mistake. And that is, and it's true, right? In the practical sense, someone asks a question, how do I deal with that question? But what's much more important is if you know who you are, you already know how to answer the question. And we're trying to do it backwards. We're trying to let the cart lead the horse instead of the horse leading. Your child should be the horse in the lead, but your child only feels uncomfortable with those questions because they feel uncomfortable with themselves. If somebody asks me if that's my mother and I don't have any issues, any thoughts, any whatever about it, I say, yes, that's my mother. When I don't feel comfortable, I start trying to explain. And let me tell you this, parents, because I talk to a lot of parents, they get it from you because that's what you're doing. You have to feel comfortable in your role as the mother of a Black son. You have to feel comfortable in your role as the mother of a Black daughter, because what they see you doing, and I did a whole live on this before of the whole, we don't have to match. And so I'm going to use that because when somebody and when you respond and you've been taught kind of this response to say, well, families don't have to match. What you're saying is your Black child doesn't match us. You're not talking about we as a family don't match. The family matches. You match the rest of your family, you match your extended family. You probably match the neighbors who live around you. So when you say that to people, you're saying, we know that you see that this child doesn't look like us and you think that they don't belong to us, but they do. But we just need you to understand that that's because families don't match. You're not adding value to who the child is to you. You're not saying and claiming. What did I say about belonging? It's who you claim and who claims you. So I understand that people think that they're claiming their child when they say families don't have to match, but that isn't really what's being communicated. It's being communicated as like this neutral, like something I really don't know how to answer and something I don't feel comfortable about. But my child, you know, I'm a claimer, right? I'm a mother of adopted children. If somebody asks me if my children are my children and they're my real children, my answer is yes. If you ask my children, is that your mom? They go, yes.
Right. Yes.
We're only going through all of these things, explaining and over explaining because of our own, that we haven't really worked through those issues ourselves. And so that's why somebody is giving us practice answers to answer. So microaggressions, when microaggressions come, or these different things, first of all, it's going to be dependent on your child's personality and temperament. Some of you are going to have children that just aren't going to take it. And you're going to get a whole lot of calls from school because they're going to tell kids, get out of their face. Don't talk to me. Don't, you know, and here's the thing. Parents will have a tendency to want to change how that child, well, you didn't have to say that. Well, you could be more friendly. Well, you could do this or you could do that, right? Here, let me give you some practice things to say. And when we do that, we're separating children from themselves in a way, right? So what we need to do is sit down sometimes and say, why does this question make me uncomfortable? When I'm asked a question, why doesn't the answer come to me? Because we live lives, like you said, you live lives where your children can't be separate from you. So then how do you really feel about that? Are you clear about that? Because what happens with children in families of adoption, they hear that insecurity. They hear you not being able to answer those questions. And they may never say a word about it because they don't know anything else. They don't know it's different. They just know it doesn't make me feel warm and fuzzy on it. Do you know what I'm saying? It
Right.
doesn't make me feel warm and fuzzy. They don't know that there's another option because they haven't seen it.
Right.
And so I get that, but I'm telling you, parents, I can't give you, some of the classes that I do, we kind of go through some examples of things, but you're never going to be able to come up with an answer for all the things that people who have never asked you.
True.
So you
Very.
sit in this class in May and nobody asked you a question until January, and that question in January wasn't on the list. And so I'm saying to parents the same thing that we need to do for children. Where do you belong? Because your family changed when you decided to adopt a Black child. And so what some parents are dealing with, they're struggling with their sense of belonging. The truth is that some of their friend groups changed. The truth is some people now don't hang out with these families because they can't do race jokes anymore. The truth is you can't go to some places because you always knew that that place wasn't friendly to Black people. And so you already know that your child is not safe in these spaces. And so some parents have not really dealt with their sense of belonging and who's their new community. Parents keep trying to fit into the same community that they were in before they had these children, and they're finding that doesn't work. And so I know I talk to families who feel isolated, that feel separated from their siblings. I know that there are families who are not going to Thanksgiving and not going to places because mom, dad, dad, mom and mom, whoever are partners, their sense of belonging has been shaken. You never thought about your neighborhood before you had these Black children. You never paid attention that Mr. John down the street was always outside looking for some stray Black child walking through the neighborhood. You just said, oh my God, that's Mr. John.
Mm-hmm.
We
Right.
never thought about it until we had these changes in our lives. And so parents are wrestling with these issues. And what's unfair is that it gets pushed off on the children.
Yeah.
We have to do this for our kids. Well, now we have to move for our kids. Well, now we're going to this place for our kids. When the truth is, I no longer fit as a parent in
Yeah.
this environment of parents. This environment of parents, I always knew who they were. It just never affected me before. So I was comfortable sitting in this PTA group, even though I knew the things that they were saying. But now, as I'm becoming more aware, now that I'm looking at my child, now that I hear these comments and they're about my child and my family, I, as a parent, don't know where I belong. And so you're trying to do all of these things at the same time. And I think people are not honest about the grief that comes with that because parents have a sense of loss and parents have a sense of isolation and some confusion and trying to figure out how to manage that. And our kids are following our lead. They're following our lead. So when parents become comfortable in Black spaces, and they walk into a Black space and their child says, I don't want to sit with you because you're my mother. My question is, have these white moms cultivated relationships with the other moms in the room? So when you walk into the room, because that's how I do, when I walk into the room, I drop my child here and then I walk over and sit down and talk to parents because I have a sense of belonging in a space, right? So you can't leave your child because they're 6. I can give an example. My daughter going to Girl Scouts. They don't let the parents come in Girl Scouts in the room, right? But there was a bunch of parents. They used to meet at the library. There were a bunch of parents that were downstairs having coffee. So the truth is, there are some of these parents who drop their kids off at the Black space and then they meet their girlfriend, Tracy, Trixie, whoever around the corner, and they're spending that hour, right, where they're comfortable with a person and they're not trying to become comfortable within that environment. So like I said, it's not your house, but it's the same subdivision.
Right.
So we can still claim the same subdivision, which means I can be friendly to the person jogging or the person walking their dog or the kids riding their bikes. I can still feel comfortable in that space. And when you do more of that, your children will feel less, they will feel less embarrassed, less like they have to push you away because you have your own identity in that space.
Mm-hmm.
And that your identity is not tied to their identity. And I'm telling you, and I get it, I hear it. We can't let them, and we are a family. We are a family, but if you have white children, you're not going everywhere with your white children. That's just not true. I
Right.
know because I go to places and I see tons of white children and they're not there with their parents. So I know this to be true. And I think, but we have to deal with those feelings and those emotions that come with not really even knowing and figuring out which part is race based and which part isn't race based,
Yeah.
right? And which part is affecting us as parents from a race based perspective.
That sounds like a lot of internal unpacking. But
It is.
so where would a parent, Tabitha, I think it's Tabitha, just said she never thought about the grief that came with all the changes. Now she knows grief is there. What does she do with it? Where does she start?
Culturally Fluent Families.
I mean, that's a perfect place to start.
You know what? It's transracial adoption is its own, you know what I mean? It's kind of its own thing. And I think, and I've been around the community for a long time, and I think we all do the best that we can with what we have and what we know. And I think for too long, many of those communities were run by people who had no cultural connections. And so they were only talking about transracial adoption through a white lens, and they were always centering the parent. And so, so where do you start? You start by so some of those things were hang out with other transracial adoptive families so that your kids know that they're normal. Well, a Black child has to be normal outside of the context of a family. So when you get together with transracial adoptive families and all the parents are white, Black children are not developing themselves as they're not developing a sense of belonging and Black identity. What they're doing is separating off, saying we're not really sure how to integrate this family that we have into this life. So where does a person start with it? I think you sit down and listen. For those of you that are out there that try to make it simple, but it starts with asking you the question, why did you adopt a Black child? It's really answering the question. It's not just brushing over it. Why did I adopt a Black child? And I know that we hear, the statistics and there was this and that, but I really want people to get real with that, because if you had no relationships, no real significant relationships with Black people, if Black people had never been in your home before you adopted a Black child, there's something that happened within your mind. And it isn't that you became woke and you became anti-racist. What it really means is that you had some other desire that was strong enough to overcome objections that you've had throughout your life. And so when you look at why did I adopt a Black child, we have to get real. Some of it is medical, some of it's religious, some of it, you know what I'm saying? So in order to figure it out, we have to, because there's some parts of that we didn't think about or consider prior to making that choice. And as long as and for the time that we're not clear on why we made that choice, our children can't fully develop their identity, because you can't explain it to them. You can't tell them what it was of value in them particularly. You can't tell, right? When we go and we buy a diamond, we understand that we chose a diamond instead of a rock. Well, the rocks, they had a lot more rocks available than they had diamonds. Well, the diamonds are a lot more expensive, but they had rocks. And if you polish a rock, if you really polish it, and they even have those rocks that kind of look like diamonds. And those are the kind of mind games that we play with ourselves. But it's going back and it's answering. So I'm going to give people 3 things, might be 4, but 3 things to ask yourself. Why really did I adopt a child of a different race? What did I think life was going to be like with a child of a different race? And what have I learned that I didn't know about adopting a child of a different race? And what has changed in my life? What have I lost and what have I gained? That's 4. But what have I lost and what have I gained? And that's the place to start, and to really start having an honest conversation, because parents, and it could be anything, but when we as parents are doing the duck walk, where we're cool on the surface and we've got these wonderful answers, but underneath, there's this peddling constantly to stay afloat. That's what our children are reading through us. And so Black children in white families, more than Black children somewhere else, they need to have that sense of security of I belong here, but they need to know why I belong here. And when parents can only say, well, because we're better than the other guy, that doesn't make them have a sense of value. So belonging, for as much as it's about other people, it really is about how we feel about ourselves and the strengths that we have and what we kind of bring to the table. But how do we develop them? Through a sense of belonging, through being in a community of people who support us and embrace us and inspire us and motivate us and challenge us and correct us and shape us. And so that's not just for the children, that's also for the parents.
This makes me, yesterday there was a session about big emotions, and the takeaway was basically, if your kids are struggling with big emotions, you probably are too. It sounds like your child is struggling with a sense of belonging, you are too. So parenting advice for the day, if your child is struggling, you are too.
Mm-hmm.
I hate that we have to end this conversation because there's so much valuable information here. Where can people continue the conversation? Where can they find out more about you, keep learning from you?
Well, people can join us on Instagram at Culturally Fluent, at the @ sign, and Culturally Fluent. If people that are here are not a part of the Facebook group, you can join Culturally Fluent Families on Facebook, with a caution that I'm going to come back to in a second. And then there are also classes that I offer through Culturally Fluent Families. So one that's coming up is Ages and Stages, which kind of really carries over this conversation that we're having today. That's going to be done March the 13th. There's classes on engaging with the Black community. And then there's a parenting class, Navigating Race, Culture, and Adoption, which also kind of carries some of these themes. And so if you go to the website, culturallyfluent.com, you can go to the courses page and you can see some of those things there.
Perfect. What's the caution?
Oh, the caution. So here's the caution. The caution is that we don't do surface. It really is. It's a good opportunity to have good discussions, but you have to be a person that comes there on mission and follow kind of the learning activities and the things that are there from a learning perspective, and not allow yourself to get caught up in the drama. Because, with 15,000 people, there can be some, to me, it's not as much as you could potentially have discussing race in the very, very serious way that we do. So that's the caution, is that coming into the group, just understand your own mission and your own focus, and don't get caught up in everybody else's stuff. So
In the moment of drama, scroll for Miss Valarie. Oh, okay, that she clears it
only
up.
read my post. Don't read anybody else's post.
That's what I love about that group. Drama erupts, you come in and you explain it, and I'm like, oh, that makes so much sense. Okay.
Oh, well, good. I tried to, but this was really great, Vanessa, and so I really appreciate you inviting me to come and spend this time.
Thank you very much for being here. It was wonderful. And everything but the courses page, all of the rest of the links you mentioned are in the description. So people should be able to easily click on those and find you.
Okay.
And I will also add the courses page after this. And Stephanie says, Culturally Fluent Families has challenged me to think of things differently and what it means to center my children. And I feel like that sentiment could be said by the 20,000 people in your Facebook group. So thank you very much for everything you do.
Well, hopefully there was some value and some nuggets that people can take away.
They definitely were.
Thank you so much.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay, you too. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.